So, as Jameel Saab introduced me, I'm basically a journalist and also a freedom of speech activist. And I moved out of Pakistan in February this year, and I live in exile in France, in Paris right now. And I recently launched a website called safenewsrooms.org. It's basically a digital media platform which documents censorship in Pakistan and South Asia particularly. And then we were doing some pieces from Pakistan, from India. We're also trying to expand the coverage to China and other Asian countries like Saudi Arabia also. So this was because I was invited here to talk about Kashmir, I thought maybe I should just mention this recent piece that I did on my website. It's called Silencing Kashmir, the Dangers to Journalism in Pakistan-Administered Kashmir. Now, we've all heard of what happens on the other side of the Indian-administered Kashmir. Usually the coverage is, the access is allowed. We have international bureaus on the other side of the LOC, and a lot of coverage comes out and a lot of condemnation comes out, and there is, the media talks about what goes on in the Indian-administered Kashmir. But what goes on in Pakistan-administered Kashmir is usually blacked out, especially by Pakistani mainstream media. And in this particular piece, we'll see some of the examples of the particular censorship that we see in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. So, recently only the UN launched its first report on human rights in both Indian-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. And while it mainly focuses on the abuses of the Indian military, it also talks about Pakistan and asks it to stop its misuse of anti-terror legislation to persecute peaceful activists and quash dissent. The report states that violations in Pakistan-administered Kashmir are of a different caliber or magnitude, while decrying restrictions on freedom of expression and association. So basically in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, this is the main issue, is that there is persecution of peaceful protesters, peaceful activists, and any kind of dissent or any kind of narrative which challenges the military's narrative, the Pakistan Army's narrative there, is silenced. Some of the examples that I got through this piece, which is basically done, I worked through anonymous sources. I mean, I know the sources, but I do not name them because of their safety, because they're still in Pakistan or in Kashmir. So first of all, I'll just go through some of the taboo topics that are not covered when it comes to the Pakistani media or the local media there. First of all, for example, with regards to the military movements, presence and actions, the news organizations in Pakistan-administered Kashmir region do not run any information which is independent. And I remember this because I was in Muzaffarabad 2 years ago almost myself, and I was at the press club, the Muzaffarabad press club there, and basically I was, we could see that it was at the time when, if you remember, the surgical strikes had happened, and India was claiming that they had done some surgical strikes, and Pakistan was saying that no surgical strike had happened, so I had gone to investigate that issue. From what I understood, that India did cross over and come into Pakistan. But anyway, that's separate, which is also not reported in the Pakistani media. BBC did a small report on that. But so basically, we were standing at the press club, and we saw a lot of movement of heavy machinery, heavy military vehicles going towards the line of control. And there were journalists standing with me, and when I mentioned to them that this is happening and we should be reporting this, all of them said that we do not report anything that we see, we only report what the ISPR tells us to. So the ISPR, which is sitting in Islamabad or in Rawalpindi rather, tells them what is happening on ground in Kashmir, and so that is the kind of control that they have to go through. And despite that, I mean, I was working for an international media organization, so I went on and reported that. But none of the local reporters, and even those ones who were working with international media but live in Kashmir, they have a very difficult situation when it comes to reporting about these kind of issues, especially when it comes to military affairs. Even though this is a military, this is a military zone, the military controls everything, and every reporter is sort of covering the military, but he's not allowed to cover the military. He or she is not allowed to cover the military independently. Another issue that came up when I was investigating this piece was that the Frontier Works organization, which is FWO, which is a Pakistani military organization which does construction and projects and is involved in its business arm, which we all know that Pakistan Army runs a lot of businesses, more than 50 companies. And basically this engineering and construction company beat up some locals and they were harassed, and this was basically, it got to the social media, and after it got to the social media, then only some local papers covered it, but none of the Pakistani media covered it again, even though there were widespread protests happening because of this. And it shows how there are these underlying tensions between the military and the local population, where harassment or beating off some individuals can lead to these widespread protests across the valley, but still the media boycotted it. Then there's basically the political groups which are working for the rights of Kashmiris, especially those who want independence from Pakistan and India. They're non-violent separatists, whereas we do see a lot of coverage for violent pro-Pakistan extremists and terrorists, in the sense of Jamaat-ul-Dawa, Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is originally Lashkar-e-Taiba, now Jamaat-ul-Dawa or Falaih Insaniat Foundation, or all the names that they keep changing. So basically, there was this protest that happened by Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, which is a political organization, and it organized a political rally in Poonch division, and the participants were demanding a ceasefire between the two countries, because, as you know, on the LOC there's a lot of bloodshed that happens because of the firing that goes on from both sides. And they were asking that there should be a ceasefire, but the protest was barely covered by the local media and not at all by the Pakistani mainstream media. Some news channels covered it, and how they covered it was they said that this was a protest against India, the Indian aggression and the Indian LOC flare-up, and how India is responsible. So they even reported half-truth, which is in fact shows not the real situation on ground, and kind of paints India as the aggressor or the oppressor, but while Pakistan is all doing the same thing. The censorship is not limited to political groups only. The Pakistani administered Kashmir, the government there itself, is also sometimes muted in its coverage. For example, the Pakistan Army recently harassed a journalist over his report in which he had quoted Farooq Haider, the current Prime Minister of Pakistan administered Kashmir. The PM had demanded the abolishment of Jammu and Kashmir Council in Islamabad, which is basically what controls Kashmir. There's this government, but it's more or less a token government. And the council controls the region, and basically this particular statement was published in a newspaper, and then after that, it was the Prime Minister's statement and somebody who's elected, and despite that, the journalist was harassed and he was told to retract his article. Then another topic which is a taboo topic and does not get any coverage in the media is the ever-expanding military cantonments in the Pakistan-administered Kashmir region. Now, if these military cantonments were security-related and there was a reason for that, we would have understood, and perhaps they would have communicated that. But as we do know that Pakistani military, when they make cantonments, it goes into commercial aspects, commercial ventures, and they start selling this land, they make it into a property business. And this is again something which is not talked about, anybody who talks about it, and a lot of locals get dislocated, relocated, but the media stays silent about it. Some of the other examples in which how reporters are controlled and threatened in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Many of the journalists in Pakistan-administered Kashmir region work without salaries, as mainstream and local news organizations do not have budgets to pay them. such volunteer work results in exploitation by the Pakistan Army, which with reports of financial favors being given to journalists that only report what the military wants. But they also sometimes spy on other colleagues and perpetuate the environment of fear among the community of journalists in the region. Sometimes these journalists are connected to the military, the ones who are connected to the military also send private conversations and posts from WhatsApp groups. I received some information about how the journalist community itself was spying on its own brethren and its own colleagues and sending out messages which were private conversations, where private conversations were happening, and they were giving it out to the military. These journalists are used also to spy on politicians and political movements. At the main press club of Pakistan and Mr. Kashmir, regular visits by intelligence officials in civilian clothing to manage press conferences of Kashmiri jihadi leaders, or the terrorist organizations rather, are a common sight. So we see a lot of these, there's the Lashkar-e-Taiba or whatever the new names that they might come up with. There's also the other organizations like Jaish-e-Mohammed, and some other ones, which basically such press conferences are actually managed by military officials present on site, but nobody talks about them. And they're intelligence officials, they come in civilian clothing, and the questions that are asked in these press conferences are also vetted by the military intelligence officers, according to a lot of journalists that I spoke to. And usually reporters are not even allowed to call such groups jihadis, and they're forced to self-censor, and they're supposed to call them some kind of a charity organization or somebody who's in favor of Kashmir's rights, and even though there are actual militants or there are actual violent extremists and terrorists. Another trend that I found in Kashmir, Pakistan versus Kashmir, while investigating this piece was that direct intimidation is on the rise in amongst journalists in Pakistan versus Kashmir. Journalist who was working for leading Pakistani news TV channel was harassed. He's been harassed for years now. I spoke to him, and he tells me that he does not get clearance to attend many important events, and because of which his work is affected. His channel demands from him that he should cover this particular event, but the military does not give him clearance. So because of that, he faces a lot of trouble in doing his job. And his children have been repeatedly expelled from different schools, local schools, so even his family is at risk because he has independent views. A journalist who wrote a book about Kashmir dispute has faced threats ever since the book came out. The book is now banned in the region, and it argued in favor of independence of Kashmir. Another reporter who lives close to the border zone is at times denied entry into his own neighborhood. So he lives, because he lives next to the neighborhood, next to the line of control, he's not allowed to go back home at times, and he goes through these security checkposts. And he's a journalist, everybody knows him, everybody knows that he lives there, but despite that, and he feels that it is because of his independent view and independent reporting that he has to be harassed, and that's why then we get this whole environment of censorship and self-censorship in Kashmir. A newspaper that it was shut down recently, around 22 months ago, and its license was cancelled. The reason that was given to the newspaper was that it had violated its license policy. But the real reason, now this is very interesting, because again, this is talking about something which is out there, which is just reproducing something like earlier I mentioned about how they reproduced the statement of the Kashmir Prime Minister, and for reproducing that statement that he said, they had to face trouble, this journalist had to face trouble. So in this, there was this news article that was published in which it stated that 73% of citizens of Kashmir, they want independence. And because of this, the newspaper offices were sealed. The chief editor and the publisher of the newspaper have continued to face isolation, financial issues, and harassment at the hands of the military. And other journalists, like some journalists who were working with this organization and other organizations, they lost their other jobs also because the military pressured the organizations to fire them. So, in conclusion, safenewsrooms.org, which is the website that I manage, we found out that Pakistan and Minister Kashmir, the journalists are facing an unannounced form of censorship and any story that may even slightly offend the military establishment is killed by editors, reporters, and the news organizations. Thank you.